there. Welcome to the Transforming Trauma Podcast, a complex trauma podcast through the NARM Training Institute. My name is Sarah Buino, and I am a psychotherapist here in Chicago and currently a NARM student. And I am so excited to share this podcast with you all. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. The Institute offers NARM practitioner trainings for mental health professionals who are looking for advanced training in complex post-traumatic stress disorder. The neuroaffective relational model is a cutting-edge, innovative approach for resolving CPTSD, addressing attachment, developmental, relational, and intergenerational trauma. Today's guest is somebody that I'm really excited to share with you. I met Wangui Wanjiru when we were doing the NARM training in Chicago in, I think it was September, and I was just so drawn to her. I'm really excited to share this conversation with you today. I also wanted to let you know that we had a little bit of technical difficulties. It's not easy connecting with somebody around the world. Wangui is actually in Kenya. So just wanted to let you note that the audio isn't quite the quality that we hoped for, but I couldn't let you miss out on this conversation. So let me tell you about Wangui. She says, I'm a mental health and behavioral medicine therapist. I practice in the fields of clinical psychology with an interest in complex and shock trauma. I'm currently working as a psychosocial counselor with torture survivors, developing a treatment program for survivors of sexual trauma, and I'll soon be leading the complex trauma division of the Traumatic Stress Society of Kenya. I enjoy reading, good food, great conversation, and a good workout, and of course, kittens, puppies, and babies. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Wangui. Hello, Wangui. Welcome to Transforming Trauma. How are you?
I am good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited the technology worked. I got to tell you, I was a little nervous.
I know, same here.
Yeah.
Very nervous.
You're in Kenya, right?
Yes, I'm in Kenya. Currently, it's about 10, it's almost 11.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah.
You're staying up so late for us. Thank you so much. Well, let's dive in. First thing we like to do on this podcast, much like we do in a NARM session, is ask what you would hope that listeners get out of our interview today.
Okay, my hope is that they get that the issue of trauma isn't a local issue, it's a global issue, and that the efforts to deal with trauma aren't just happening in America. It's like, personally understand that it is possible to get past trauma, and there are so many modalities that are currently in use and, currently in use to sort of to overcome it as an individual and as a community as well.
So let me just summarize there, because you froze a little bit, but I think what you were saying essentially is that efforts to deal with trauma need to be happening around the globe, not just in the U.S. And in the U.S., we definitely tend to be a little America-centric, right? Is that what you've observed?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it is. And I think especially with Africa, I think there's, like how people say they do a world tour minus Africa. I think minus Africa is a thing for everything, including trauma. But I would like people to know that even here in Africa, especially, we have a lot of transgenerational trauma. We have a lot of war traumas, shock trauma. I mean, we are also doing something about it.
I am definitely really excited to hear about that, for sure. How do you define complex trauma in terms of what you're seeing in Africa?
I think for us, complex trauma is cultural. The way we are raised, part of the culture, the religion, the society itself is very closed off to anything that is attachment related and relational in terms of emotions.
Really? Why do you think that is?
I don't know what happened, but people aren't really, I don't know where it was lost. I'm sure it was there somehow. And I don't want to bring in colonialism and all that, but somehow...
Why not? Bring it in. Bring it in. Do it.
Okay. Okay. I think... Obviously, for being Kenya, we were colonized by the British, and most of us got religions that are they don't make you primary. You're secondary to the community. So your well-being, you don't come first. Your well-being comes after everyone else's well-being.
As an African, you mean?
No, as you as an individual living in our society, it's communal. It's not individual. And being that it's communal, we are bound to neglect our emotions. We are bound to ignore them. And now being communal and then authoritarian, you can imagine what happens. most of us, we exist, but we are completely disconnected to our individual self. And that disconnect from the individual self now, meaning that we don't personalize the other person outside of cultural expectations. Yes, we can personalize you as a woman, we can personalize you as mother of so and so, we can personalize you as, you know, whatever tribe you are, whatever religion you are, but the individual self, we never get to that.
Wow. So it's almost like the opposite of the United States, right? Because
it is the opposite.
So individualistic. Wow. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the opposite. But now you see now what complex trauma comes into that, because now when a child is born, they have the individual sense of themselves. But now the culture is sort of, it sort of works very hard to take away that individuality. And in the process of working hard to take away to remove the individuality being central to that person, the primary thing it does is teach this person to sort of deny their own needs and their emotions, to ignore, you know, the spirit itself within themselves. So you can see how that, first of all, number one, that leads to soul death.
Right.
And as a result of soul death, we don't humanize each other. We don't humanize each other in terms of our emotions. We humanize each other in terms of just the physical well-being and how much it is contributing to the community.
Please forgive my ignorance, because I just don't know enough about African culture to speak intelligently on this. So I'm just going to ask questions. Why do you think that happened? Because I understand the communal living, certainly, and to a certain extent, I understand the, you know, putting the group before self. But the way that you're describing it sounds really dire and really extreme. How do you think it got to essentially extreme, like you said, soul death and denial of the individual?
First of all, the communal living served a purpose in the beginning, when it was not in the beginning, but there's a time it served a purpose in that it protected you. It gave you a sense of community, and being in a community was literally a matter of life or death. Right. But to continue, I think it has outdone its use. Well, the communal living, it has benefits, but the issue is that we continue to carry it as a whole without sitting down and looking at what is benefiting, what is not. Now that we know that a human being is body, mind, and soul, what in our behaviors as a community is actually putting people's souls? How can we better nurture people's souls? And why is individualism a threat? What are the threats of people knowing themselves and liking themselves? Then that means loss of culture. And culture seems to be a very central aspect to us. I think actually the threat is the need to hold on to culture.
Interesting. But I mean, we know that when you are connected to yourself, you have more capacity to connect to those around you.
Yeah.
Oh.
Now that is like the knowledge that comes with, you know, when you've sat down, you've studied human behaviors, you've studied emotions. You know, when you're numb, you know that. Right. But the general person, I mean, doesn't really, they see as, you know, there's this thing of connecting to yourself being seen as selfish. Right. Yeah. So now if you're told that, you know, like I voice my needs, I'm told I'm selfish or that I'm self-centered, you know, I say personally, I don't feel like I'm ready for marriage. Then, you know, people tell you that is self-centered because you're putting your needs first before the needs of the community, which the community wants population. And I am not, you know, I am not generating population. I'm not helping in generating of population. So it becomes an issue of self-centeredness and selfishness. So now you can see how that, I mean, it's just like soulless. There's like a loss of soul to yourself. And a lot of us are just walking around, just traumatizing each other because we have no connection to ourselves. So we are not able to personalize the pain that we're putting people in.
Which that is exactly what's happening in the US right now, but just from the different side of the spectrum. So it's just, wow, it's just incredible.
Yeah. So, and then now you can see how that goes into, you know, it goes very far. It becomes now even the baseline of shock trauma.
And can you just define that for folks? What shock trauma is?
Okay, shock trauma, the difference between complex trauma. Complex trauma, I think, is trauma that comes from attachment, relations. You know, shock trauma comes from unexpected, uncontrollable circumstances. For example, like war, natural disasters, actual life-threatening events. That's now the shock trauma. The
Mm-hmm.
other one, it's not life-threatening, but it alters your life completely, changes the trajectory and that your life takes.
Right. I'm realizing that we didn't even really introduce you properly to tell people really who you are and where you're working. So let's back up. We talked about a lot of big stuff already, but kind of back up. So you're a therapist in Kenya?
Yeah, I'm a therapist, clinical psychologist and a therapist.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
And my area of studies are in neuroscience and behavior.
Given all that you shared about the fact that the culture doesn't really recognize emotions and attachment and all of that as being beneficial, what led you? How did you decide to become a clinical psychologist?
For me, the issue of human behavior and behaviorism has always been, it started out as curiosity. I was never satisfied that the way people act is just how we are supposed to be. I knew there was something driving their behaviors. I knew. And I always questioned it, but then I wasn't supposed to be questioning it because I was supposed to accept it as the way it is.
And you're like, not going to do that.
No, I needed to understand, like, what are the motivations of people behaving this way? Like, what motivates people to be the way they are, to present themselves as they are?
Yeah.
And then from now, that curiosity, I got to understand that before the human behavior, there's the thoughts and the emotions.
Yeah.
And that world I had not gotten exposure to that world because you weren't supposed to be thinking about the things that you're doing. They were already conditioned. There was a way that you do them. So there's not much thought that goes into your behavior. You're just conditioned to behave.
Wow.
But for me, I wanted to know, like, when we go beyond this conditioning, what do people really want? Like, who are people, And I think now that came with questioning of, people have feelings, meaning that, yeah, we do this thing, but do people really want to do it? Or is it because of the punishment of not doing it that they continue to do it? So yeah, that's where my interest in human behavior came from. And then I went far, far deep into understanding that, there is the brain that is behind it. So I needed to understand, like, okay, if the brain is behind this, what happens when things go wrong? Where could things go wrong? So, and that's where now the neuroscience came in. Yeah, I wanted to understand, like, yeah, there's the physiology of it, but there's also the psychology of it. I wanted to be able to understand both of them.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And then, you've already said you're seeing trauma around you all the time. So I'm guessing that that led you to work with trauma. I'm also curious what led you to specifically work with NARM. How did you even hear about it?
I know.
It's amazing.
So for me, trauma, I think the most interesting form of trauma that led me to NARM is because most of us are brought up in a very authoritarian way. There's this thing of, like, there's tension. There's, like, just an elephant sitting in the room, like, just so much tension between parents and children. A generational tension. Like, you can tell people don't really like each other, but you can't say that you don't like them. Because, again, the Bible says, or the Quran says, or the culture says. But I just noticed the tension between generations. And now that I went into looking at what is happening between these people's attachment that is causing the trauma. And I realized that a lot of us really have very unhealthy or insecure attachments.
Right.
And actually working towards a secure attachment with your child is seen as sort of like the child has defeated you.
So secure attachment means the child has defeated you?
Like, being oh no. No, like, being kind to your children, listening to them, saying sorry to them, putting yourself in the same position as them, or even lower, is an indication of, like, this child has sort of, the power dynamics have changed. And if any time the power is not, you don't have the power, that means the child has defeated you.
Wow.
So, which means now there's not really a lot of us who are receiving secure attachments.
Right.
And I don't think for most of us, this never comes out until we are going through a crisis. And personally, I went through my own crisis. So I was like, I need to figure this out. I need to figure out what is going on, because I thought things were good between me and my parents until the crisis came on. And I was like, oh, wow, I actually don't have a secure attachment. So let me find information that will, apart from the original, the traditional attachment theory. Let me find further information that will address this issue from a biopsychosocial model.
Yeah.
Because I'm not just feeling this thing as an emotion. I can feel it physically.
I'm feeling it as you've been talking about it, the tension in me. Oh.
Yes. Yeah, you feel it. So I went on to some illegal website, not going to mention them because I still use them and I don't want them taken down, So, so I went on to that website and I was looking for, books that address this from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I came across NARM and I just downloaded it and put it in my reader, but I did not read it for like a week. And then a week later, I opened it and I can tell you that was a long night.
Oh, did you stay up reading? Wow.
I know. I was like,
page turner, couldn't put it down.
I was,
wow.
And I think a few pages into it, I had to stop and Google, like, who is this? Like, who are these people that have actually, because I wanted to know, like, how did someone come up with this? Like, the fact that someone has thought about this and put it out there, this person is way ahead of time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I Googled and I saw this. I wanted to be involved in it.
Yeah.
So I was like, let me just, whatever it takes, let's do it.
Can I just stop and note, I wish that listeners could see your face right now. Your face lit up in such a beautiful way.
Yeah.
And, one of the things we talk about in NARM is really noticing when our psychobiological states have shifted, and just your smile there kind of indicated something internally is happening for you.
Exactly. There's that connection, there's the connection to the me, there's not in NARM language, there's the connection. And it's funny how it happens, because the joy that came with finding NARM for me, I was shocked. I was ready. And I found out about it and sent out emails, put together a program to see how I can get training from them. And, asked for any assistance, whatever assistance would be available. And I ended up coming to the US in September, and I did the first one and joined your team now in Chicago for the second one in October. And as I went through the programs, at some point I was just like, this is something that needs to be an international movement. It can't be localized, because first, I feel that societies that are communal and mainly authoritarian need NARM more than the other. I think NARM is for it's very appropriate. I don't think any other treatment model has hit the nail on the head more than NARM in terms of actually being able to capture that communal setting of living. So for me, it's been a great journey.
And then
now applying it.
That's what I was just going to ask. Please tell us, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, applying it to myself and then being able to apply it to my clients. And, I came back and you're thinking that it might not work because they don't know what NARM is.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know what attachment theories are. But then you sit with them.
They don't need to.
They don't need to know that. Mm-hmm. You sit with them and you do it. And, it's like sort of like pulling a string on a sweater, and the whole all need that this is not a sweater, this is like a blanket. Because it's heavy and big and has gone on for generations.
Oh, that's a really beautiful analogy.
Yeah, it's not a simple scarf or sweater. It's like really like it's carpet size. But then you sit down with someone, and first of all, I think for me, before using the techniques themselves, I sat down and looked at whatever NARM has come up with, is it culturally appropriate? So first tweaking that out to understand what is applicable, what is not applicable. Most of it, thankfully, a lot of it is very much applicable. And now sitting now with the client is, knowing that this is something that I am not forcing. We are not Africanizing this. This is like human behavior. In the past, most models we've had to, we are asking, is this for African people? Like, no, this is not cultural. NARM is it's not a cultural thing. It's human behavior, basic general human behavior, and it's relational human behavior.
I'm really glad you said that, because I know one of the things that I was struggling with at one point was feeling like it wasn't necessarily addressing trauma that's ongoing, right? Because when I think of what you're describing, and I mean, this happens in America too, but essentially that there is shock trauma constantly happening. There is relational trauma constantly happening. And when you're in that constantly, when is the post-traumatic growth, right? There is no post because it's always happening. So it's really, really lovely to hear that you feel like it's still relevant and still really resonates, even when the trauma is ongoing.
Like, I think it empowers. I've seen a lot of clients that I've used it with. I mean, it changes the baseline of the person.
You mentioned that or actually maybe a little birdie told me this, that you had your own kind of personal transformation that happened in one of the trainings.
Yeah.
I see that smile. Do you mind sharing some of that? Is that possible to share and give an example of what that personal transformation looks like?
Yeah, I think it was during the third session of it. And I think I started through the lesson and I could feel the heaviness in me, like the heaviness in my chest. And I think I got to a place where I'm like, wow, this thing, I really completely trust it now. So I will let myself into it. I will let myself I will not be guarded about it. And once I did, I mean, I sat through a session and, sitting there and sharing things that are very private and very sensitive and coming out of them empowered. The one thing I love about NARM is that it's empowering. It helps you realize that there's so much power in you. It returns your agency, which is the power of agency, is that you let go of the helplessness. For me, what happened in that moment, I think I came to realize my power. Like I came to realize this trauma is there, but I can change the baseline, that I can change the me, and that it's not falling on a person that is wounded. It falls on someone that is strong, and therefore I respond to it differently. And I think the me in that trauma, as you can see based on where I'm coming from, the me had never been awake to realize that actually I do have the power. I've always been, the me has always been guilty, small, backtracked. And so for me, it was just the me in me can be big enough to face these issues.
I can almost hear the internalization of what you were describing earlier about this authoritarian and communal sacrifice of self, how that strips you of your power, and to be then reminded of it, to be able to step into it. You're already clearly a very powerful human. You were like, I'm gonna do something that's completely counter to my culture for work, and I'm finding this theory that is revolutionary, and I'm using it with people. So it's easy for me to see on the outside, and I'm sure easy for others to see, but for you to touch into that for yourself. And again, your face just lights up as you're talking about this. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I think that catapulted me into wanting to, get to know that me more, wanting to heal that me more, wanting to be, wanting to know like that part of myself that had been lost.
Yes.
Or sort of buried,
Buried. Yes, that's what I was thinking.
There, yeah. It's not lost. It's just buried on a lot of conditioning. It's there, but it has not been accessed, or it hasn't been accessed since maybe I was 2 years old. So It's now like reclaiming myself. So the beauty of reclaiming yourself is that when issues come on, or even though you're still living within the trauma, is that these issues don't come to an empty soul, or they don't come to a dead soul. They're coming to a soul that can resist and choose what gets in and what does not get in. Yeah, and I think that's the empowering part of it. I mean, yes, people might be continuing to go through trauma, but as long as the software within themselves is different, I mean, it's like you're just giving them like, what is it, that the virus protection?
Yeah. Oh, that's a really cool way to think about it. Yeah, it's like a vaccine.
Yes, it is. Actually, it is.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's not about like getting people out of trauma. It's not about like, let's do this treatment after the trauma is done. It's let's empower people as they're going through trauma, and therefore they will carry less of it.
Are there any specific stories that you can tell us about folks that you've worked with? Obviously, leave out the details, but any transformations that you've seen that have been really inspiring for you?
Definitely. There's a lady I was seeing, and she had very narcissistic parents, both of them, unfortunately. But one is covert, the other one is overt. So, you know how that goes.
Oh, yeah. Not personally at all. I don't know anything about that.
I know. So she came into therapy. She has anxiety issues. And I wanted to know, okay, yes, there's the anxiety, but what is beneath this anxiety? Because the anxiety is a symptom that's presenting.
Right.
So there has to be the driving factors of it. In the beginning, I remember we were just going around and, just dealing with the anxiety itself, the symptom itself. And then I decided, okay, I introduced NARM to her and told her that maybe we need to start using it. And she was fine. So we started using it. And at some point, it was so empowering that she's the one who pointed out that she has noticed. I think for me, when I realized that it's actually working, was one day she mentioned that she has noticed her need to protect her parents. And that she has noticed that when that need comes up is when her anxiety goes up. When now she's put into that position where it's choosing, maybe it's about like maybe paying their bill versus like, spending that money on herself. When she's in that position, and now the issue comes between choosing between herself and protecting the attachment, is when she noticed that that's when she would have like panic attacks and all that. So it's like there was a threat in like choosing herself, and that threat itself led to the anxiety. And the anxiety was the anxiety functions to warn you that you're crossing boundaries that haven't been crossed before, that you're going outside of the cultural expectation. So the anxiety would come in and she would do what needs to be done to protect the attachment. But once she realized that that's what was going on, she addressed that issue differently. She was able to, regulate herself. She would, do some self-regulation and, sort of mothering her own soul into calming down that this is not a life or death situation.
Right. I have the chills right now. Seriously.
Yeah. Like we can choose ourselves and continue to live. Like we don't die.
Right.
And I think, we're not talking about big decisions. We're talking something as small as maybe her father telling her that I will call you at 4:00, and 4:00, maybe she's in a meeting. How can you dare tell your father you're in a meeting,
Right.
And I think now when she got to a point of understanding that the anxiety is my child conscious fighting to maintain this relationship that has been very, toxic.
Yeah.
Because she came into therapy talking about she wants to cut ties with her parents even. But in the beginning, when I brought up anything about her parents, she would say, yeah, but it's sad because they did this, making excuses.
Right. Which so many clients do. Yeah.
Yeah. But once she got to a place now where she's able to understand, like, okay, this is my child conscious. And my child conscious just needs protecting and assurance from the adult in me that we will be fine even when we've crossed that boundary. Yeah. I think that now, that with her, I've seen her come from, and I think that is like 6 sessions covered. That simple realization cuts out so many sessions that we would need to have.
Right. Because when it's simply insight and inquiry,
yes,
we can't necessarily get to that as easily as it comes when we're practicing NARM. I've found anyway.
Same here. I found that you can do as much psychoeducation you can do, but as long as it doesn't come from the soul itself, you'll keep going back and forth. But once it comes from the soul, that cuts your therapy sessions by so many sessions.
So to save money, use NARM, right?
Yeah, ask your therapist to use NARM.
Yeah.
You're looking to save money.
There's the next commercial.
Because the agency itself and the empowerment that comes with it, which is a good thing, because we're not trying to keep people in therapy.
I am. At least for myself anyway. I never want to stop. But you're right? Like,
yeah, we're not trying to trap them. You want them to come in and empower them. And the good thing with NARM, I found that all the clients I've used with NARM, that at all levels, after they learned about it, and after we got to the point where now they learn that, oh my God, I have a child conscious, I have an adult conscious, is that it empowered them to even seek knowledge on it. Like, people have been reading books, they've been watching YouTube videos.
Oh, wow.
It's like it brings out curiosity, a level of curiosity towards the self that I have not seen with other models.
Wow, really?
People are curious. People, people go back and want to talk to their mother, like what happened, wanting to know the history of their families. It's brought a lot of curiosity for myself and the clients that I've seen. It puts you in a place of wanting to understand, how are the people before me? Like, how did we get here?
Well, and you mentioned earlier transgenerational trauma, and that's the inquiry, right? Is really, really looking at our lineage. I think about that too with my own family. Like, there are people that have died, and I'll never know the stories, about what really happened. Wow.
Yeah. And I think for us now, it's like, okay, let me understand. Like, it has pushed me personally towards wanting to understand my culture better, like to understand what is it, again, like you asked me, that we are protecting, that is worth the pain of losing oneself.
I just want to let that sentence reverberate.
What is it that we are protecting? Like, what are the gains? What is it that we are gaining from losing touch with ourselves?
Well, and you early on mentioned colonialization. I just went to an anti-racism training where they encouraged us to continue to ask the question, who is benefiting from XYZ? So, who is benefiting from the loss of the individual self? I don't know if you know the answer, but
me, I think I don't fully know the answer, but that is something that I'll definitely find out soon.
Yeah, right. So, well, it's somebody in power.
Who benefits mostly? I want to go into, because a lot of the culture itself is very patriarchal.
Right.
Authoritarian. So yes, whoever the people in charge, who are mostly from a patriarchal perspective, they're men. So, I think the people at the top, who generally, those are the ones that are benefiting. From an African perspective, yes, there is the global, there's Africa versus the world, then there's Africa versus itself. But our loss of touch to ourselves is benefiting the 1%ers in Africa and the rest of the world.
Right.
Yeah. It's not just an African issue. Like, what does it mean for Africans to not be in touch with themselves? What does that mean to, the global market of oil? What does it mean to the global market of elephant tusk? What does it mean? It means something. It must mean something. It helps colonization of all forms.
That's what I was going to say. To depress Black and brown people is to make sure that they can't rise to power, right? And so if there are only a few on top, that's all right. Let's leave a couple of them, but let's depress the rest of the society so that they can't empower themselves.
And I think now for Africa, that's like a continental issue, and then now there's not just the enemy outside of us, there's the enemy within us. And now those are the few people, like how you said that there are those few people that, that are, cherry-picked to represent. They're just for representation, but they don't mean much. Those now, when they get home back to Africa, or when they're here within us, those now become the oppressors.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's sad to see, because it requires a lot of removing yourself completely from yourself in order to be oppressed, in order to, to deal with oppression, in order to accept it as a reality, because your soul is constantly resisting it. Your soul is telling you that there's something wrong with it.
I'm almost wondering now how much of this has to do with internalized racial oppression, because it's like when people vote against their own interest because they're so oppressed, they don't even know that they're oppressing. And then the people who could be helping each other, lift each other up, just continue to oppress one another, right?
Yep.
Like if I'm a Black person in power and I have a negative view of myself based on what the world is telling me is my worth, why not go ahead and oppress everyone else?
Exactly. You project your issues onto other people. And now for these people who are oppressed, at some point they know it's wrong, but because of power dynamics, it requires you like cutting cutting touch or losing touch with the soul that is constantly whispering to you that something is wrong. Because of what use is it that your soul is telling you that something is wrong when you cannot do anything about it?
Right. And I'm actually curious, that makes me want to ask the question about addiction and suicide, how prevalent that is.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Recently, there was a documentary that was done by the BBC, and it's very sad. It's a very sad documentary because it was showing, I think it was addressing the issue of male suicide. I think, especially last year, it was a very sad year for many families because a lot of people committed suicide, especially men. And now the issue of, one might ask why men. And I think the issue of, men aren't emotional.
Right. It's not culturally acceptable.
Yes. We as Africans are not emotional, but the men especially do not need to be emotional.
Right.
But you are told not to be emotional, while the world as it is, Africa as it is, with its leadership, continues to, every day, every morning you wake up, it continues to prove to you that your survival means nothing. It's a daily test of your worth.
Right.
And somehow that is not supposed to get to your emotions. Yeah, you wake up, you went to school, you wake up, there's no job because you don't know someone at the top. But somehow to be a man is to provide for your family. But
right.
I mean, it's there's a lot, the culture itself, and then you add capitalism to it, they contradict each other very much.
Yes.
And on top of that, now to be told that you cannot be emotional about it.
Right.
You're just going to blow up at some point.
Absolutely.
And there are no protective measures. It's not like the men leave school and they are handed jobs at the graduation. Is they leave school, they have to get out, and they don't have an uncle who works in government. They don't have connections. I mean, you're just heading towards that point of now asking yourself, do I commit suicide or do I not? Because, I mean, what are the chances of ever attaining those cultural expectations that have been put out there for you? And to not attain them means you're not man enough. And if you're not man enough, I think that's probably one of the biggest issues. I mean, one of the biggest issues in Africa is people wanting to prove that they're man enough.
I think that also happens in America. And it's just this opposite sides of the coin, really.
Yeah. And the issue here is that it literally could get to the point of now, I mean, I was working in a rehab. You see people who are addicted, but most of them are using it to cope with the fact that they have failed. And now once you go into exploring what does this failure mean, it all goes into their gender issues. It's not that I failed because I did not pass school. It's, I failed because as a man, I am not able to feed my family. As a man, I have not married. As a man, I mean, it always goes back to as a man. Not to say that addiction isn't happening in women, but if we look at, there's a very big disparity between, addiction in both and suicide in both male and female. And the issues that are driving that are gender issues, and the gender issues underneath that are that most people are traumatized into not having an identity, but being just part of a group.
And, as you were talking about this, what I'm hearing from a NARM lens is really pressure, right? So pressure to be a certain type of man. And what NARM hopes to do is really recognize that, yes, these messages are coming from society, but we are putting the pressure on ourselves.
We have internalized it.
Yes.
Trust me. You see, the thing is with conditioning is that now whoever was teaching leaves that teacher in you. They don't need to be constantly there for you to abuse yourself. You internalize it, and now you become your worst enemy, because genuinely speaking, a lot of these people, their family members would come into now therapy or, family therapy, and would say, we don't feel that you're a failure. We have never said anything like this to you.
Wow.
But the client would be resisting what they're saying because they cannot, how are you telling me that, that I'm okay? Well, I am 30 something. I don't have a family. To them, it doesn't make sense. Even though the family has never said these things to them, it has never been verbalized, they still feel that it's an issue. They cannot even believe the family is supportive of them. There's this thing that of not believing that you will be loved or you can be loved until you fit in with the cultural expectations. So the love itself, I think for us, is from the outside to the inside. First, I need to be loved by society.
Yeah.
Then my family will love me.
Yeah.
Then at last I can love myself.
Yeah. Wow.
Because it's very painful to go from that direction, from society, family to yourself.
Yeah, it's a losing battle. Mm-hmm.
It's an extreme sport because, the goalpost is...
I love that. Yeah.
The goalposts are constantly changing.
Yeah.
You wake up and to be a man is to feed your family, and then next year to be a man is to own a car. Then the next year to be a man, it's constantly changing.
Wow.
But what NARM does is like it recognizes that once, if the love starts from the self, then even giving it to the family and the society is very easy.
Yeah.
And it will not need to be from external factors.
Yeah.
It sounds weird saying that internalizing love is a thing because love is internal. But for some of us, we have to learn to internalize it. Yeah.
Well, your initial goal was to help people understand that trauma is something that needs to be addressed around the globe. And I'd say you nailed that.
Oh, I hope so.
Right?
It got very exciting, but I'm glad that we were in line with the global perspective of it.
Yeah. Well, I could keep talking to you forever, but as you mentioned, it's late. So I want to let you go to bed.
Thank you. That's kind of you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Wangui. This was absolutely incredible.
You are welcome, and I enjoyed it as well.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. If you want to learn more, you can check out the show notes or visit us at www.narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. The Transforming Trauma podcast is brought to you by the NARM Training Institute. NARM practitioner trainings for mental health professionals are offered across North America and internationally. The NARM Training Institute also offers the Inner Circle, which is an online self-paced learning program intended for anyone who is interested in joining an international online community focused on healing complex trauma. You can find more information about these trauma-informed learning programs in addition to other resources on the website, www.narmtraining.com. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We really look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.